Okay. Okay. We are up three. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Let's talk about Venezuela and Ukraine and Greenland. Oh, my goodness. Yes, so much is going on in the news. And we, of course, will be talking about healthcare because now these healthcare premiums have exploded. They have exploded. I don't know about you, but mine are just unbelievably high. We'll be talking about that and the 2026 elections. And there's so much to talk about, but it's important for us to discuss what's happening in this hemisphere at this moment and in Ukraine, but particularly Venezuela and Greenland, because there was a Club of Rome's study. They have all of these think tanks and clubs that really helped to organize the world. And it came out in 1974, Bryce Green, from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. You've probably heard of this, where they were organizing the world into at least 10 regions, or 10 or fewer. And so the question became, who would control each region? And the United States was supposed to be controlling this part of the world. So there's that. Is that what's happening here? Is this about the petrodollar? If the world goes off of the petrodollar, that will imperil America and our standard of living. Indeed, many people do not know that America is really in a precarious situation financially. We need to borrow at least $3 trillion to stay afloat. What's really happening here? And what about taking a sitting head of state out of his bed and his wife out of their bed and being dragged into the United States in the middle of the night? And now that the indictment has changed, that is to say, there is no connection between the president of Venezuela and heading a drug cartel. What does that mean? What does all of this mean, really? And I think we need to ask these questions because we're seeing the domestic fallout. The repelling of the helicopters and whatever it was that picked up Nicolas Maduro and his wife, First Lady Celia Maduro. Well, guess what? We had that in Chicago, in the middle of the city. So let's back up. Let's really look at what it is that we're looking at and why it's so important. Please meet me on Facebook on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. Become my friend there, and please like and share the show. Meet me here on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. That's right. I need you to like and subscribe and like and share, like and share. Help us with the algorithm, everybody. I need you to like and share the show. Like and share. Thumbs up, thumbs up. The more of you who do that, the more people can tune in and the more they can better able they are to find us. X at Santita J, at Santita J, or the Santita Jackson Show. Please meet me there. And Santita Jackson IG. Yep, I think I've gotten it all together. And of course, I'm streaming on Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.'s page. There we go. So let's get right to it, everybody. Of course, you know what time it is. It's Bruce. It's Bruce. Now I'm going to make you Bruce. Bryce Green. Happy New Year, my sweet. Have
Happy New
Bryce,
Year, Santita.
of course, at the Green BJ on social media platforms, but he's also on Substack. Meet him there. A lot of people were so excited. They said, "Ooh, Bryce is here. Where do you want to begin?" Well, let's start with Venezuela. Do you mind?
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly the biggest story in the news today.
So, what was your reaction to the? Is it? Would you call it a capture or a kidnapping of the president of Venezuela and his wife?
Well, I mean, it's very blatantly a kidnapping, something that is flies in the face of international law and U.S. law, for that matter. The idea that a country can bomb another country's capital and then abduct the head of state of that country, uh, that's very obviously not included in the rights and responsibilities afforded to member states of the United Nations. So
Hmm.
it's a totally illegal act. But that's the lowest hanging fruit of criticism that we're seeing. In fact, what it is an expression of the American drive to dominate both the hemisphere and the broader world. And it's not like this is a secret or this is some theory about why the US government is acting the way they're acting. It's something that they've been saying out in the open, brazenly. Trump invoked what he is calling the Donroe Doctrine as an update to the Monroe Doctrine, which was essentially a American policy prescription that mandated that the entire Western Hemisphere was to be dominated by Western interests and not European interests. Effectively, it claimed that the entire hemisphere was American, was for the United States to exploit as it saw fit. This, of course, was realized throughout the largely the 20th century. Number of coups, interventions, overthrows, invasions, everywhere from Honduras to Santo Domingo to Cuba to El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras. Like every country, almost every country in Latin America has been touched in some way by America's Monroe Doctrine. The attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of the president is just the most recent iteration of that. And they're doing it because not only do they want to control the hemisphere, they want to control the hemisphere's resources. Right? There's no reason to just control parts of the world that give you no benefit. The reason to do it is so that the resources, the natural wealth of a country can be extracted and siphoned off into Western corporations. That's what the plan is, and they're being very open about it. They're saying we're ready to get American oil companies in there. We're ready to get all of this natural wealth and resources, ready to install people in charge of Venezuela who are more amenable to the desires of Western capital. That's what this is all about. And any pretense of legality or drugs or I think in the indictment against Maduro, they accuse him of having machine guns. This is all just nonsense. It's a pure pretext. It's a pure smokescreen for just naked American imperialism.
How will this play? Well, how do you think this is playing in Venezuela? There's been, it appears, a blackout in terms of the news, at least in the United States, on what's happening there. And when you read international papers, particularly those in the global South, they're reporting this very differently. That this
Right.
is upheaval there.
Right. If you look at the media coverage in the West, the United States in particular, a lot of pundits and commentators are pretty jubilant about the cleanness and the surgical nature of Trump's strike on Venezuela. And if there is criticism, it's criticism from the Democrats in politics who are saying that this attack is fine. It's good that Maduro's gone, but we just wanted to be kept in the loop. You didn't fill out the proper paperwork when doing this, which isn't really much of a criticism at all. It's an actual endorsement of Trump's activity and, hand wringing about the legal formalities that are required to do it. It's not a real criticism. If you look elsewhere in the world, of course, things are quite different. The rest of the world is very worried at this blatant violation of international law, not only for its own sake, not only because the norm fairy is offended,
Mhm.
but because it means it has very real implications for these own countries and their own security. For example, in Iran, which has been the target of American attack most acutely in the past year, but in reality for the last 40 years, Iran, they have to be thinking, well, what if the U.S. did some sort of operation like that and came in and abducted the president or the supreme leader or what have you? The same is true for Brazil or Colombia or Cuba or any country really that isn't a superpower with nuclear weapons that can really defend itself. If they don't have that, then they have to be thinking right now, what does this mean for our sovereignty? What does this mean for our security? Because it's important to zoom out and ask, why did the United States resort to this kidnapping of Maduro rather than the other options that were reportedly on the table? If you go back to the New York Times and other papers, they were reporting on the litany of options put in front of President Trump to deal with this Maduro problem, quote unquote. One of the options was, of course, simply bombing the country in a Libya-style intervention, come what may, with the decapitating the leadership and hoping that the military would defect over to the United States side. Other plans included just ramping up the sanctions. Other plans included using forces on the ground hostile to Maduro to overthrow the government. But this option of sending in special forces to kidnap Maduro was reported on, and it's worth asking why they chose this one. If it is my opinion that one of the reasons that they chose this less bombastic method is because the American people are largely not in favor of foreign entanglements, especially when they're so blatant and brazenly based on lies, like this one in Venezuela. If there were U.S. troops committed to staying there long term, I think the American public would be a lot more hostile to the idea. And so the resort to simply special forces targeting only Maduro and a security detail, I think that that's a reflection of Trump's understanding that these wars are not popular, that American empire is not a very popular political project to continue for him. And I think that that's worth considering, especially because we feel so disempowered when we're watching Trump, destroy anything resembling a rule of law, and of course reinforce the idea that the rules-based international order is a farce. It might feel disempowering, but the fact that there is a movement in America, there's a tendency to criticize and avoid war, and that the people in power have to take that into account. I think that demonstrates some degree of public power.
What do you think? uh, We're seeing that the indictment has changed, that they have removed one of the charge that was the basis upon which he was removed, allegedly, that he is this narco terrorist, that he is the head of a drug cartel. That's been removed from the indictment. So, what does this mean?
Well, it just confirms everything that I and other people have been saying for the last several months since these attacks on the boats started in September of 2025. It means that the U.S. government was knowingly lying about the public relations justification for why they were going after Maduro. They were lying about the boats carrying drugs. They never provided evidence for that, and of course, by extension, they were lying about Maduro being the kingpin of all these drug boat empires. It's pretty ridiculous if you actually listen to what they were saying beforehand. But the fact that they dropped it from the indictment means that they're not even willing to stand by their own defense. And it's again worth zooming out and asking ourselves, well, what is this indictment even supposed to mean? What is this legal process that Nicolas Maduro is being put through? It seems like even following it, like it's some sort of real legal case, it seems to demand that we jettison our brains from our bodies. Because in reality, this isn't a legitimate legal trial where there are real rights and there are real due processes. This man was abducted. The head of state of another country was abducted, plucked out of his bed with his wife, and plopped in an American court. If that's the case, if that's a precedent for how we handle international law, then why doesn't Venezuela try and abduct President Trump? Or why doesn't China go and abduct President Trump? Why doesn't Putin just go in, send special forces, abduct Zelensky? I mean, this isn't statecraft. This is madness. It's pure gangster imperialism that has been the hallmark of American foreign policy for the last 100 years, if not more.
Well, does it matter that, initially we heard that there were no casualties, but now we're finding that that is far from the truth, that at least 80 people have been killed, 32 Cubans, in fact, um, at last count, had been killed because of the aggression that was being threatened, that they are seeing. They sent in Cuban forces to be supportive of Maduro. I mean, what are the implications of this? I mean, how do you think this is going to play out um, throughout the hemisphere? I mean, you've got Trinidad who are supporting the United States, but I'm wondering if the prime minister there is going against her own people.
Well, the feeling of the general public in Latin America is often extremely hostile to the West and Western corporations and U.S. foreign policy in general. That's been the case because the people who are there have lived under U.S. authority, U.S. empire. You can go back to the U.S. occupations at the turn of the 19th or the 20th century. Occupying Nicaragua and Haiti and Honduras. You can go to the terrorist wars throughout the 80s under Ronald Reagan, the use of terrorism against Nicaragua, the use of terrorist violence in Guatemala and El Salvador. These are uh, deeply ingrained into the public mind in Latin America. But that doesn't mean that there aren't millions of people who are willing to go along with the U.S. There aren't, it's a minority, but it's a significant and powerful and especially moneyed minority that's
Hmm.
willing to go against the public opinion of their country as long as it earns them and their cronies a few bucks. And that's how it's been in any imperial project targeting any population. There will always be a section of the targeted population willing to sell out their country for money, for a cut of the imperial plunder. In Venezuela, I mean, we saw that with Machado. I mean, she was very openly saying that she was willing to throw her country to the dogs and let American corporations rip it apart. Uh, It's open. And she's not the only one. I mean, we've seen Juan Guaido back a few years ago being declared by the United States to be the true president of Venezuela,
Hmm.
despite him having no support. Machado, of course, also has no support. Well, before him, there was Leopoldo Lopez, who was part of the coup against President Hugo Chavez. Uh, he was uh, perfectly willing to sell out his country and collaborate with the United States in the destruction of the country. They were supportive of the sanctions. They were always saying, please intervene. And it's this class of people that shape the coverage coming out of Venezuela. It's this class of people shaping American public understanding of Venezuela. I'm sure you all have seen videos of someone saying, "Oh, well, we want the United States, President Trump, to come in and remove this dictator from power. Please, I beg you." But these are minority voices. They represent a privileged class of people who were able to either immigrate from Venezuela to avoid, any policies that affected their wealth, or they were able to insulate themselves from the poverty that still strikes all around Venezuela. They're able to insulate that by virtue of being part of the owners class. And so these are the people who are saying, yes, we really want the US to intervene. These are the people scattered all around the world, dancing in the streets that the US just bombed their country. Like I said, there's never any shortage of people willing to sell out their country, willing to endorse the empire, and willing to back this vicious attack of sovereign on the sovereignty of their own country. So that's where public opinion is.
How do you think that the media have handled this? Because American media, um, they've reported on this uncritically, it appears.
Yes, you're exactly right. I mean, even before before this first Trump administration, before the last Trump administration, the U.S. media coverage of Venezuela has been skewed and biased in favor of this comprador class, these group of people who are willing to sell out their own country and have studiously ignored the desires, needs, and public opinion of the majority of Venezuelans. The majority, of course, is the working class, the people who are in poverty, who were uh, raised in poverty, who aren't owners of businesses in Venezuela. If we look at 20 years, 25 years of the last of media coverage in Venezuela, it's always been the same. They've been hostile to any idea of a social revolution. They've been hostile to anyone who is supportive of the president, first Chavez and then Maduro. They studiously ignored the general public who have been very supportive of the reforms of Maduro and Chavez, and they've been uh, uh, very eager to platform those voices in American foreign policy establishment that are gung ho about attacking Venezuela. They're quick to publish op eds defending it. They're quick to go into these expat Venezuelan communities and get their voices. And of course, they'll say, yes, we hate Maduro. We want the U.S. to bomb our country. Of course, ridiculous, but it's all part of this apparatus of manufacturing consent for American war crimes and American empire. If you guys want an excellent book on this, and I'm sure you know the author, Alan McLeod. He's
Mhm.
currently a staff writer at Impress News,
Mhm.
but he wrote a book called Bad News from Venezuela back in 2019. And it's his investigation into the process by which the images and the opinions and the points of view from Venezuela are translated into American audiences. And he found a lot of the things that I just said, that American journalists in there, they typically, if they speak Spanish at all, they're confined to a relatively wealthy part of the city. They don't go out and to the barrios where normal people live. They go out and talk to the friends and families and relatives of the people who, again, are willing to sell out their country. There again, there's a wealthy class in every country willing to sell out their country in order to get wealthier. And that's the dominant source of a lot of these stories about Venezuela. Yeah, the book is called Bad News from Venezuela: 20 Years of Misrepresentations and Fake News in US Media. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. But we're seeing the same. It's a blueprint to look to look for the things that we're seeing today. I mean, you can go into any of the top newspapers, and there are op-eds talking about how great of an operation this was. Maybe on the other end of the spectrum, you'll find papers that publish articles that are critical of the legal apparatus that was used, or critical of the fact that Congress wasn't notified. But they're not critical of the fact that Trump believes he can go in there and blow up Venezuela. They believe that too. They just don't like the fact that he didn't involve Congress, which isn't a serious criticism. Again, Congress has become a dead organ in the American state. They really just greenlight anything that the executive wants. When they have the chance to do oversight, they refuse to do it. When they have the chance to actually govern and legislate and do any serious things, they refuse to do it. In fact,
Is-
the House Democrats,
Mhm.
Axios reported that House Democrats were struggling over ways to message about this Venezuela attack
Mhm.
because they were so in support of it. And according to them, they couldn't simply condemn what Trump did because they like that Trump did it. But
Mhm.
in the interest of appearing anti Trump and pretending to be the opposition of this empire, they're now uh, defaulting to these legalistic critiques. He didn't inform us. Trump didn't involve Congress. How can we run a country if we don't involve Congress? Meanwhile, they're fully in support of genocide in Gaza, proxy war in Ukraine,
Mhm.
and of course, this new Don Road doctrine.
But let me ask you this: is this President Trump, or is he doing the bidding of the American corporatocracy?
He's absolutely doing the bidding of the corporatocracy. In fact, it's not even clear that Trump had any special interest in Venezuela when he came back into office. During his first term, of course, there was this maximum pressure campaign, the implementation of very harsh sanctions, the sponsorship of a failed Bay of Pigs style invasion in Venezuela. There was all sorts of things. But when Trump got back into office, he didn't seem that interested in going after Venezuela. And reportedly, again, these are only reports, so you can only say what we can find out. But reportedly, Trump was uninterested in restarting his war against Venezuela until the Rubio, nexus of foreign policy started promoting this narco trafficking
Mhm.
narrative, right? Because Trump is tough on crime and wants to secure our borders. Well, this narco trafficking narrative was used to push Trump into supporting and legitimizing and greenlighting some harsh policies against Venezuela, including the mass murder of people on the high seas, the attack on 35 plus boats, increase of sanctions, et cetera, et cetera. But, Trump doesn't necessarily personally care. It's not even clear that he personally will benefit from this, although, he and his weasel family will certainly find a way. But this seems to be, like much of American foreign policy, a result of a psychological operation, not just against the general public, but also against the president to push him into taking these policies. The foreign policy blob that makes these decisions, that pushes these things, they have their own interests. They're representative of the corporations, and also a very rabid right wing community, largely based out of South Florida, of Cubans and other Latin America pink tide quote unquote refugees. They have very hostile opinions of of socialist governments of Castro, of Ortega in Nicaragua. They have very hawkish points of view. And since that area is such an important political stronghold for the Republican Party, a lot of the local politics, the local hostility towards these other countries gets translated into actual American foreign policy. The corporations who run American foreign policy, they see that as a great benefit, a great boon for them, and they're able to, wield that sentiment to manufacture consent for uh, this this brazen cash grab of a war.
What is the end game here?
The end game seems to be the long term dissolution of the Venezuelan socialist project.
Mm.
Every country that has done a socialist revolution, especially those in the Western Hemisphere, have found themselves a target of Washington because it's like a mafia. The Don, in this case, the Don Donald Trump, uh, he can't stand being disrespected. It can't stand the fact that someone would try to chart a course, well, that didn't give tribute to the Don. And so when Cuba had the revolution, they were punished, and they're still being punished to this day. When Nicaragua had their revolution, they were attacked by Contras in uh, out of Honduras. When Venezuela had their revolution, you sanctioned them, tried to coup their government. There's a good chance that America assassinated Hugo Chavez. There's no direct proof, but it is certainly in line. And that attack, that punishment for doing something socialisty, that continues to this day. And so that's the end game. They don't want any alternative to serve as a model to countries looking to exist outside of the Western influence orbit. And along with that, the end game is to get the resources, ensure that the resources can be mobilized for American imperial projects rather than being used to better the lives and standards of living of the people in the country, which is what the Maduro and Chavez before him were doing. That's what they were doing. That's the whole essence of the Bolivarian socialist project, was to reclaim these natural resources away from Western corporations and let the wealth of that land flow to its people. The end game for America is to prevent that from happening. And the ultimate end game, of course, is to use the Fortress America, create the Western Hemisphere that is only influenced by the United States, so it can better take on its international superpower rivals, that being Russia and China. All of U.S. strategic planning is geared towards that reality. And any country that can stand against the U.S., well, that stands in the way of U.S. hegemony. That stands in the way of the ability to fully commit to fighting against Russia and China. It's the internal logic that drives American foreign policy, and the internal logic that gives us all these wars, all these $1 trillion military budget. It's the internal logic that is the reason that while they're decreasing the benefits for food stamps, they're increasing the amount of money going into the personal bank accounts of CEOs of Raytheon and Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. That's how our system works, and that's the overriding end game.
Where do we go from here with that? Because now Marco Rubio is saying that Cuba, you're next. Stephen Miller and his wife have said, Greenland, you're next. And now Denmark and the European Union have weighed in and they've said no, hands off Greenland, although Greenland is a territory that's been commandeered by a European power. I mean, let's the Inuit people, the indigenous people we would call in old times Eskimos, but they are indigenous people who are native to that region. They're 88% of the population. No one's even talking to them, Bryce Green. I mean, it's as if they don't even exist. They have no say over the world's largest island, which is mineral rich. Cuba is OPEC eligible. They found a huge tranche of of oil off the coast of Cuba. I mean, I mean, no one's talked to the people of Greenland. No one is. And do you really think that we're going to be able to roll over Cuba?
They're not going to be able to roll over Cuba, although, again, with this operation against Maduro, that might serve as a model in which they can extract key figures within the Cuban political system. Then there's nothing stopping America from doing that other than its own people and the ability for Cuba to deter. But if the international reaction to this attack on Venezuela is muted and there's no real consequences for America, well, then we can expect bolder moves in the future. We can expect that Trump or his allies or others will, or his successors, will feel empowered to go in and smash up a country, smash up its leader, kidnap some people, kidnap their wife while they're sleeping, and do whatever they want. Because the writer Caitlin Johnstone put it very nicely. America needs its bullies. America needs both the flowery rhetoric and charm of Barack Obama, but they also need the big stick, blustering bully in Trump, who's willing to use the big stick that is America's military. The empire requires both of them, and if that bully isn't deterred, if that bully isn't stopped, well, then it's going to continue to smash up the things around them. And so places like Greenland, places like Cuba, places like Colombia, Gustavo Petro, they should all be very, very concerned about what America does next, and they should be very worried if there is no major international reaction against this. If Trump is able to do this unpunished, because that would just encourage more. Yeah, we've seen this ladder of escalation in a number of arenas. I mean, we've seen this ladder of escalation in Ukraine, where sending weapons to the Ukrainian military in order to keep the war going to prevent negotiations was met with objections from Russia. But when Russia didn't do anything, the level of weapons simply increased. They said, "We're not going to send jets to Ukraine. We would never do that." And then they send jets to Ukraine. We're not going to send tanks to the Ukrainian military. We're not going to do that. And then they did that. We're not going to send, attack of missiles to Ukraine. That'd be an escalation. And then they did. And so this slow burn of American foreign policy continues in all of its arenas, and it will continue to burn hotter if nothing stops it.
What is going to happen with Greenland? As has been reported, the European Union, Denmark, they're pushing back. Um, what of Greenland? I mean, many of us don't even think of Greenland, but it is extreme. It's the world's largest island, and it is extremely wealthy, full of what do they call these necessary minerals. That's not the exact term for it, but you're not going to be able to have a television or a telephone without the minerals that are in Greenland and quite frankly in Venezuela and all of these and the poor countries are the richest in resources, ironically enough, right? So
Right.
what about Greenland? How, because now it's one thing for us to look at the indigenous people of Venezuela who are indigenous, they are black, um, but now you're dealing with a European territory, right? It's how does that change, no pun intended, the complexion of this particular issue?
Well, the first question to ask about Greenland before we ask about what's going to happen is why it has to
Mhm.
happen, or why the American empire is fixated on Greenland. And it has something to do with the resources that are in the ground. But if we look at the policy papers and the pronouncements from the think tank world and the Rand Corporation and all of these foreign policy uh, uh, idea factories, it seems that Greenland's strategic importance doesn't come from the economic benefit, but it comes from its geographic placement so close to Russia. And
Mhm.
if we go back to this immortal 2019 Rand Corporation study, probably heard me uh, talk about this study over and over again, but it's so important. It's a study that predicted the U.S. Support for a war in Ukraine. It's a study that said that if America provides weapons to Ukraine, then Russia will feel like it has to invade. This is a good thing. The study also pointed out ways to harass Russia in other ways. One of the main ones was, well, one of the not the main ones, but one of the side ones was increase American military presence in Greenland, so that Russia's Arctic front would be open. If America increases military activity over there, so close to Russia, Russia's only response is to do something, is to build up its defenses in there. And this paper, mind you, was all about overextending and unbalancing Russia. And so an Arctic military buildup would be something that would certainly overextend Russia or extend it further than it has been. These are pretty important strategic components to American foreign policy, but they really aren't talked about enough. All that's talked about is Trump being a bully towards Denmark, which is very obviously true, but it's separate from the main story. Now, to the question of what's going to happen, that's unclear to me. The Europeans, very obviously, they're objecting to this. A series of European leaders issued a series of statements, all condemning the idea of Trump going into Greenland or seizing Greenland in some way. And this isn't the first time that this has entered the news. This happened last year earlier in Trump administration, and in that case as well, the Europeans were very against it. But what can they do? Well, what are they going to do about it? If the U.S. wants to, it can destroy most of the European economy. It can destroy, a lot of the foundations that make Europe work the same way. We've seen Europe capitulate to a lot of America's demands over the last years, especially the one where they're increasing their own funding, their own military funding, to be directed towards Russia. I mean, that's a pretty significant turn of Europe. And so it seems that they're firmly in the side of America, but this issue of Greenland might cause a rift. So it's really unclear. If the Americans decide to go in, it means that they're willing to fight if not a hot war, which I doubt it'll be, but some form of conflict with Europe, some form of diplomatic or social or narrative conflict with Europe. Are they willing to do that? It's unclear. Or is this just part of the almighty art of the deal that that Trump is so famous for, at least claiming to be doing, and that he might just get some concessions from Europe for not going into Greenland?
But what is this? But again, who is he speaking for? Because this is not just, I think we've become so focused on the personality of President Trump that we don't look at the corporatocracy behind him, for whom they're speaking. Let's be very clear: the presidency, and the presidency now it's not what it was originally intended to be. They've basically become spokespersons for business interests, and we saw that on open display at this past inauguration and last year.
Yeah.
But that's because at least with his inauguration we saw that. But that is how this works. That's how the system works. I mean, Kamala Harris had as many, if not more, billionaires supporting her. I mean, this is where we are.
Right.
So my question is, who needs what? And I mean, and is this transnational, or is this just American corporations? What is this?
So it's a number of things. There is a lot of tendencies that make up American imperialism, a lot of constituencies that drive it. Some of it is just the jingoistic nationalist fervor of, boomer white men who love to see America blow up other countries because that's what America does. But behind that, of course, there's the corporate interests involved. And there are American corporations. There are also multinational corporations, but all of them exist under this Western-led or this U.S.-led Western economic system that that aspires to be global in all regions. And part of a lot of the conflicts, part of the reasons for a lot of the conflicts that we have now are because this multinational coalition of, this is everything from oil services to weapons manufacturers to natural gas extractors to insurance sectors, financiers, all of this conglomerations of interest. They have interest in expanding the markets that they're able to operate in and that they're able to profit from. That drives so much of the conflict that we've seen throughout America's entire history, from day one, All right. And then, of course, you have the liberal interventionists who believe that the way to spread democracy around the world is to intervene in other countries, that America has a moral obligation to intervene where it sees deficits of democracy and human rights and all this nonsense that they don't truly believe themselves. Well, some of them do, but they never applied consistently. And so all of these different tendencies make up American foreign policy, but overwhelmingly the most important one is the corporate interests. The corporations are, I mean, that's where money comes from. That's how all these think tanks are funded. That's how all these university programs are funded. That's how all these foundations that are doing NGO work in all these countries. That's how they're funded. It comes from corporations. These aren't, you know, just altruistic individuals trying to do good. These are people and institutions with interests. And once you understand that they're willing to act to realize those interests, well, then the study of American foreign policy becomes a lot more clear and a lot less directionless. But that is why we're going in. And American corporations, they want to see America on top of the world. They want to see this Western-led system on top of the world. But even if America falls, there's still other places in the world in which capital can run. It's not like the capital's loyal to America. It's not like these these multinational corporate boardrooms are waving the American flag and singing the national anthem. No, they don't care. America just so happens to be the hotbed where someone can make a buck, but it's not out of loyalty to a nationalist project. It's out of pragmatism, and that pragmatism extends to any constituency on the globe that might threaten their profits.
So, do you see this Greenland project moving forward? Uh, because there seems to be an absolute push, I mean, a major thrust to capture these places that don't have the military might, right? But they have so much wealth. And I don't know if Americans are really clear on the challenges facing America economically. And we have almost $40 trillion of debt. It's unsustainable. And you have to pay an interest on that debt. And we need $3 trillion right now. I was listening to Dr. John Mearsheimer from the
Mm,
University of Chicago. And he said, we need that right now, right now. So be very clear. This is a desperate grab for resources and power. So what's
right.
the, I mean, just give us like I guess the 30,000 foot view, or, I mean, and even the view from the weeds. Just help me to understand what are we, because we're being assaulted by so much, Bryce. We still have Ukraine. You wouldn't have that war without us. We've got Greenland. You've got Marco Rubio talking about, oh no, Colombia, Cuba, watch out. We don't have enough soldiers for that. I mean, what it's like, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah. I mean,
But we
it's
do have
hard to.
drones. We do have drones. I just wonder how that's supposed to work.
Yeah, like I said, it's hard to say precisely what it is that will happen with Greenland. It's hard to say whether or not this will end up in a deal favorable to the U.S., if the U.S. will back down and look like a total wimp, or if the U.S. is actually going to go in there and take it over somehow. Who knows what that would look like? That would mean serious problems for their alliances. But well, the declining West uh, is at the forefront of these people's minds, and they only have limited time to act with such unprecedented relative power against their neighbors, against the other countries in the world. So it's really unclear. But what is clear is that the Trump administration is marking a new era in American foreign policy. Not wholly unique, not wholly out of the blue, but they've dropped this pretense of liberal activism, of this idea that they're going in there for the good of people. If another president would have done what Trump did in Venezuela, we'd have seen a lot more rhetoric about the human rights conditions in Venezuela. You'd have seen a lot more rhetoric from the president about how awful of a dictator he is, and you'd probably see a better legal case against him or something. But the Trump administration has dropped that. The liberals, of course, they have picked it up and they believe it full heartedly, and that's why they're in favor of insane illegal action against Maduro. But at the highest levels of decision making, that pretext is gone. That pretext is gone, and so an attack on Greenland would certainly follow in that trajectory. Whether or not the costs are worth it, that remains to be seen.
So, well, what about Ukraine? Do you see a connection with Ukraine, Colombia, Cuba, Venezuela, Greenland?
Yeah,
What is, help me to just help us to understand all that we are seeing, because there is militarily, there's a lot going on, and we have been looking at a military that we don't have enough people, we don't have enough personnel. Many people, many Americans are not even healthy enough, Bryce Green, to be drafted or to enlist. And so, what is you? Where does Ukraine fit into all of this? Because we've got President Zelensky coming over here once again, coming to a country that does not have a lot of money. We can print as much money as we want, but where does Ukraine fit into? Oh, does it fit into this constellation of uh, of military adventures, uh, power expeditions?
yeah. So Ukraine is certainly related to Greenland, certainly related to Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, certainly related to China, and very obviously related to Russia. To understand Ukraine and how it fits into this, we need to accept and understand that the reason that the Ukraine war is happening is because America used Ukraine to overextend and unbalance Russia. That was their deliberate policy, and as I stated earlier, they wrote this down years ago, years before the war even started. And so, if we understand that, then Ukraine's role in all this becomes a lot clearer. Uh, Ukraine is being used to keep Russia uh, at bay, to is being turned into a battering ram essentially to keep Russia bogged down in a conflict so that its power projection elsewhere suffers. Meanwhile, this is done with the goal of increasing U.S. relative soft power and hard power in other areas of the globe. Overextending Russia in their minds, in these planners' minds, is a way to prevent Russia and China from joining their forces effectively. And if Russia and China are unable to combine their forces, well, then the United States remains the preeminent power in the world. That's the situation that the U.S. wants to maintain. If you look at the most recent national security strategy memorandum, that's exactly what they're talking about, preventing another rival power from being able to dominate the world the way the U.S. does. Uh, Now, in Ukraine, there's actually a very interesting shift going on right now. There are factions that believe that the U.S. needs to wrap up Ukraine, and because the U.S. is actually expending a lot of treasure over there and a lot of Ukrainian blood over there. There's also a faction that wants to escalate and continue the war fighting. And now, loosely speaking, the CIA seems to be in favor of continuing the war. The CIA has been a massive anti-Russia machine for, well, I mean, since its inception in 1947. And uh, the Ukrainian chief of staff, who was just promoted, was a direct CIA asset. And there seems to be more involvement, a willingness to take a greater hand in Ukraine on the part of the CIA. Now, this war is obviously being orchestrated from DC, from Brussels, and from Poland, and the Ukrainians and their political system are really only they're far downstream of the decisions that are made in Washington and elsewhere. But the reason it's so critical, especially in the discussion about Venezuela and others, is that it is just one piece in this grand chessboard that of U.S. influence and the people struggling against U.S. influence that we have to pay attention to. If we want to be uh, serious about making peace in the world, about analyzing the sources of our tension, the only explanation for, or the most coherent explanation for it, is this American quest for global dominance. The Venezuela is being hit hard because they threaten America's global dominance, because they have friendly relations with China and friendly relationship with Russia and Iran. That's a threat to America's global dominance. Greenland is a way to put more pressure on Russia so that America can enhance its global dominance. The reason that Taiwan is such a hot button issue, it's not because Americans are concerned about democracy in Taiwan. If you believe that, you must be dumb. That's not a serious argument. The reason that America is interested in Taiwan is because they know that China considers it a strategic necessity to have control over Taiwan. If America can mess with that and provoke a reaction out of China, well, that could justify more hostile action on their part on the world stage. It could justify, uh, 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 it would push China to take action the same way Russia took action in Ukraine. Now, all of this is in order. It's not just for fun, right? America doesn't want to be on top of the world just for fun. They do this because it's a corporate logic. They do this so that they can extract more of the world's resources, so they can have more of a political say in the world's economic governing regimes. They do this so that they can make more money. That's really it. I mean, it's not a super secret, obscure internal logic that we're searching for. There's no magic bullet that we're looking at to understand American foreign policy. It's wealth. It's wealth and power, overwhelming wealth and power. And that's what's been dominating foreign policy. That's what dominates all policy in America and most other places since the idea of the West even became a thing. Go back to the founding fathers. I mean, who were they? Wealthy business owners, wealthy plantation owners who didn't like the way that they were taxed, and so they seceded from the British. I mean, that same class of people has been in charge of America and its policies since 1776. There's no reason to expect that to have changed since then. But that is what the American empire is. It's a system of expanding influence, of expanding economic and political and military influence and institutions, all for the purpose of expanding the ability of corporations to make more money.
So
That's
then,
what it
so,
is at the end of the day.
so this is not just about democracy, then,
It's
really?
not about democracy in the slightest. Democracy is something that these people throw around to justify what they're doing. There are plenty of true believers. There are plenty of people who fully believe that overthrowing Maduro and creating a lawless state where America dominates, that's the best way to bring democracy to the world. And there's entire, university departments and coursework and research tracks that are dedicated to promoting this idea and instilling it in the people who matriculate through these institutions. So that if you graduate from, pick an institution, if you graduate from, Columbia School of International Relations, well, you're not thinking like you and me. You're not thinking like what we're talking now. There's a whole language and vocabulary dedicated to blunting the hard edges of empire and justifying the things that the major corporations want. That's why
But
the
let's be clear,
corporations pour money into these institutions.
they won't let you out if you think another way. I mean, that's the
Right.
politics of academia, right?
Right. Yeah, like if you believe that America is the largest perpetrator of global violence and instability in the world, well, A, you're not likely to really want to go to Columbia to begin with. But if you do get in there, there's all these professors there who will say that's probably not the best thing to write about if you want to get published, if you want to get a job, if you want to get tenure. And so you're discouraged from doing that. It's, again, not a very difficult concept, but when understood in the broader context of empire, of ideological reproduction, it gets a lot of explanatory power to how these structures of empire manifest. And so that you graduate from this and you're a professor and you believe you wrote your dissertation on the struggle between autocracy and democracy in the world stage, and something like that, and some think tank picks you up and you're writing papers about how Maduro is eroding democracy in Venezuela. They might actually believe that. They might genuinely believe that the best use of their time as an American is to spend time writing about some other country and their deficit of democracy. But we here and people like you and me, people with our critique of American empire, we understand that that's nonsense. If you're an American, the last thing you should be writing about is the anti-democratic tendencies of another country. The thing that you should be focusing on is to what extent your country is promoting anti-democracy, to what extent your country is making the empire happen and throwing bodies and lives and neighborhoods and countries and livelihoods into the meat grinder, all for the purpose of making sure that Lockheed and Goldman and BlackRock have higher returns. That's what empire is, and that's the sort of critique that's really kept out of academia.
What's the final word for us today? Because we have got a lot of things to look at as we speak. We're watching the march on Washington of the pardoned January 6th rioters. We're watching an explosion of our debt and personal debt and our institutional debt. The country is really in a precarious position economically, and Americans are in a precarious position. More than 20 million families will not get health care. They won't be able to afford it. That is a disaster. And more of us cannot afford to go to school. Just there is so much that is happening. And as we've been talking about these international issues, why should Ukraine? Why should Venezuela? Why should Greenland? Why should these issues matter to the average American?
For a number of reasons. Well, one, the idea of your government going in and smashing down doors, abducting, heads of state and their wives out of their beds while they're sleeping, and killing their whole security detail. Well, that should very obviously be a kitchen table issue. Do you want your tax dollars being spent on death and destruction? No. But if you don't care about that, if you think that the plight of other people's countries doesn't matter to you, well, then consider the effects on your own life. There's a reason that American standard of living is declining. There's a reason that overdose deaths are increasing, that deaths of despair are dramatically increasing. There's a reason that the cost of healthcare is skyrocketing. There's a reason that the cost of childcare is ballooning. There's a reason that all these things are happening, and it's because that America's resources, time, and energy are dedicated to this imperial project and not towards any project of making sure that the people who live in America are living a good life. The project that I'm talking about consumes trillions of dollars. Just recently, the Pentagon budget crossed $1 trillion. And that's only the tip of the spear of America's foreign intervention spending. There's, of course, intelligence agencies. There's the interest on the debt that we'd be paying from all the money that we've borrowed to pay for the military. And there's, definitely a bunch of downstream effects from this spending that have nothing to do with the bettering the public welfare. So if you are interested in improving the lives of your fellow citizens, if you're interested in improving your own life, well, you have to understand that the reason that that's not happening is because so much of America's resources are devoted to war. And there's no reason for that. Doesn't give a lot of benefits for your average citizen, gives a lot of benefits for the richest people in the world. If you think that that's okay, well, then, there's really nothing I can tell you. But if you think that that's a disturbing state of affairs, well, then you only have one option. It's speak out and fight back against it.
Bryce Green, everybody. Please support him on Substack, the Green BJ at the Green BJ on social media platforms. This is a brilliant young man, and it's always a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us on the Santita Jackson Show. You are family here.
I appreciate that, Santita. You're family to me.
Fairness and accuracy in reporting is how I found him. But everybody, you can find him on Substack. You can find him in social media. The Green with an E, BJ. I'm Santita Jackson, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. God bless.